what money did the government give that's money that should be paid back? So should it be the money that we paid for the renting, they pay for the renting of the aircraft? I would say no, because we provided the service for the government. We incurred costs to do that. So you'd say that's $1 billion gone. Should our people who got the money for JobKeeper pay that back? And you'd say no, because that's asking them to pay back in a difficult period of time. So what money do we pay back exactly? Because all of that money went for particular reasons, and it's not this huge lump sum of a subsidy to Qantas.
Alan Joyce, welcome to 7:30.
Sarah, it's good talking to you again.
Now, your results are out today, and we'll come to those in a moment, but I want to ask you first about The Voice, because we're about to get the date for the referendum. You've directed that Qantas supports the Yes campaign. You've got a number of aircraft carrying the Yes 23 livery. Why is an airline business taking sides in a national referendum?
Well, I think good companies should have an involvement in society and democracy and having a social conscience. One of the big parts of companies that investors look for is what's called ESG. It's the environment, it's social, and it's governance. And my experience in the past when we support things like marriage equality is the shareholders not only expected, they're demanding that you're out there doing this. And that's part of why they invest in companies.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think the coalition's taken a very different view. Peter Dutton has called corporate leaders backing the Yes campaign. He says they're craving popularity. Alexander Downer, the former foreign minister, says it's just virtue signalling. What do you say to them?
Well, I say we're part of society. Companies need to be involved in this debate, and companies need to get behind it. And what we find that's very important is we think it's the right thing to do, but we also believe that it's good for businesses to do it because, one, we know that companies that have a social involvement attract more talent, more employees. You know, what we saw after marriage equality is that Qantas went up the ratings in terms of LGBTI people wanting to work for us, in terms of young people wanting to work for us.
I remember at the time you said there was a strong business case for that. So
Yes.
you see a similar business case for The Voice?
We do, and we see it in terms of, like, we've advertised for 7,000 jobs in the last year. I've had 161,000 people apply for the jobs. I see it in customers, and if you're in a minority group, you're 4 to 5 times more likely to fly with a company you regard as representing you. If you're a shareholder, you're likely to invest in a company that you believe has a social activity. And when you ask your employees, and we did in this case, our First Nation employees, they said they wanted and needed Qantas to go out and help them. That was the number one driver for me. And then when we presented that in the hangar, we had the head of our First Nations group talk very elegantly of why this is important for Qantas. We had Adam Goods, an ambassador to us, talk about why it's important. We had Noel Pearson talking about why it was important. And it really left me and the entire management team and the entire board of the belief that this is the right thing to do.
So it's really a no-brainer for you?
It's a no-brainer for us.
Now, you've been called before a Senate inquiry into cost of living, I think on Monday, if that's correct, where you're going to face some questions from your political nemesis, Labor Senator Tony Sheldon. He says that you've turned Qantas from being an aviation pioneer into a pioneer of corporate greed. Is that going to be your legacy in some quarters?
Well, I think when you look at what we've done in Qantas over my time as CEO of Qantas and CEO of Jetstar, we have changed the industry here in a very positive way. Before Jetstar, there were a lot of people that couldn't fly, they couldn't afford to fly. Jetstar's carried 380 million people, half of them for under $100. This year alone, we'll carry 9 million people for under $100. It democratised air travel. Great change for the Australian community.
Well, that leads me to a really basic question. As the CEO of Qantas, who's more important to keep happy, customers or shareholders?
We keep customers, shareholders and employees. And every announcement that we've done over the last 15 years has something for all of them. But let me go back on innovation as well and talk about that. Qantas is now the world leader in innovation and long-haul travel. We've ordered the aircraft that are coming in 26 to fly from Sydney and Melbourne non-stop to London. We're the innovator when it comes to the loyalty program. We've got the biggest loyalty program in its home market of any airline in the world, and have really delivered to customers on that. So when you look across the spectrum of the innovation we've created, we had businesses that were floundering 15, 20 years ago. We have businesses that were underperforming. Now we come out of COVID after nearly going bankrupt, being 11 weeks away from it, with the strongest balance sheet, with the strongest profitability we ever had, and the biggest investment profile we've ever had, which are going to create 8,500 jobs over the next decade. That's what good companies do. And when companies are in trouble, unfortunately, they have to make tough decisions. And unfortunately, we have people that don't like the tough decisions that are needed to be
All right,
made.
let's have a look at some of these things. And of course, we recognise that you have a duty to shareholders. But I want to clear this up. How much money did Qantas receive from the taxpayer during the pandemic?
So the numbers that we're reporting are this $2.7 billion. But let's break that down, Sarah, because it's important. Of that 2.7, $1 billion was for the government renting our aircraft. So you can imagine, borders are closed everywhere. Australian agricultural produce couldn't get out of the country. So they hired our aircraft, which incurred fuel, in-flight charges, landing charges. We had to pay the pilots. And that was $500 million just for the freight flights. We did 3,800. We had another over $500 million for the domestic flights that had to operate because the borders were closed down. That was to get people between hospitals, pharmaceuticals to move around the country. And there was over 30,000 flights that we operated on behalf of the government. That was another 500 million. That's $1 billion. There was nearly 900 million in JobKeeper. That JobKeeper, when we stood down 25,000 people because we hadn't got jobs for them. And that went to our people. It passed through us, went to our people to help them get through. We had some pilots that were driving buses in Sydney, A380 pilots, you remember, I think you reported on it. And this was the money to help them get through no fault of their own. They hadn't got an income coming in because we couldn't pay an income, and the government helped with that. That was over $900 million.
At the same time, Air New Zealand got a very large bailout from the New Zealand government, but the New Zealand government took a large stake in Air New Zealand. What did we get out of it?
But what the largest shareholder in Air New Zealand was the government, and the largest shareholder gave equity to the business they owned over 50% of. Our shareholders also gave equity to our business. We raised $1.4 billion in equity. We also borrowed nearly $3 billion of the banks on aircraft that we had no debt against. And we sold land here at Mascot that was worth nearly $1 billion. That was the bulk of what we got through. If we were in a position like Air New Zealand where the government was a shareholder and contributed to that equity, it would have maintained its equity stake or grown it. It was a very different circumstances between the two.
Yes. Was there ever any consideration of repaying any of that money with the very large profits that you're reporting today?
So what happens, I think companies like us will be paying that back because as we're making money, we'll pay corporation tax and we'll be getting there faster. We believe in 25 we'll be paying corporation tax again. We are paying other taxes like ticket taxes, excise duty.
That's not paying money back, that's paying the money that you have to pay according to corporation tax.
But I would say it's because the company survived and the company got through.
But is that how much it cost to make the company survive, or did you get more than it took to keep the company afloat? That's the $60 million question, isn't it?
Again, I would say what money did the government give that's money that should be paid back? So should it be the money that we paid for the renting, they pay for the renting of the aircraft? I would say no, because we provided the service for the government. We incurred costs to do that. So you'd say that's $1 billion gone. Should our people who got the money for JobKeeper pay that back? And you'd say no, because that's asking them to pay back in a difficult period of time. So what money do we pay back exactly? Because all of that money went for particular reasons, and it's not this huge lump sum of a subsidy to Qantas.
We'll come back to the relationship between Qantas and its customers in a moment, but I wanted to stay with you for a moment. Of course, if you keep profits up and you keep the share price high, you personally get a very large bonus every year, a multi-million-dollar bonus, as I understand it. Doesn't that personal profit motive tend to distort your decision-making?
Well, no, because for huge amounts of time during my tenure, there has not been bonuses paid, because when the company does badly, I don't get paid. So the 3 years of COVID is an example. No bonuses were paid. In fact, for I think 4 months of that period, I didn't take a base salary, and our board didn't, and a lot of our management didn't, because we knew the company was in trouble. So there is a correlation between what happens with the performance of the company and what management is paid. That's why, and the money I get is from our shareholders. That's why I've always had, in the last decade, over 90% support for the REM report, 90% support for the shares that are given. And of course, if we're issued shares when it's low and it appreciates, that's good. But we're also doing it for our employees. Today, 22,000 employees got 1,000 shares. They also got a $5,000 bonus outside of the EBAs. That's over $360 million in benefits our employees get because of a good company. So not only does the shareholders benefit, our employees benefit, and in addition to that, our customers do benefit, because we are buying a new aircraft every 3 weeks at the moment. That's where the bulk of the profits of Qantas goes, in over a $2 billion capital expenditure every year, which is on new aircraft, new lounges, new product on the aircraft, and new services.
So that's in the future. I think if there's an overall theme to the questions around Qantas's profits that it's releasing today, it's about the relationship between those profits and how the customers are feeling. But let me ask you a simple question. You've been accused of price gouging by a number of different people. A simple question: when will airfares get back to pre-pandemic levels?
But on price gouging, I will say the ACCC, who've been monitoring us, have actually declared that there hasn't been price gouging by the airlines. And what has happened...
The airfares are still very high. When are they going to get back to pre-pandemic levels?
So what's happening, let me explain. There was a misconnect between supply and demand. As airlines, with those aircraft parked in the desert, aircraft parked for years, had to be maintained, and huge maintenance needs to take place. Airlines had to retrain all the pilots. Those A380 pilots that were driving the buses had to go through 23 hours of simulator training to get back in the air. So there's a log jam of getting aircraft back. Every airline in the world has found that. We are getting them back very rapidly. So domestically, we're back over 100% of pre-COVID levels. And today, we had a sale, the 70 in sale, with 1 million seats, with fares starting at $29 on Jetstar. I remember when I set up Jetstar back in 2004, we launched $29. The internet broke down because of it. Here we are a decade later, still offering $29 airfares. So they are coming down rapidly, and they are there domestically. They've dropped in the last 6 months by 11%.
Yes, but let's just go back to what the experience has been for the customers, because you can see how it looks, I think. Well, let me ask you this. Can you see how it looks to people who rush to book flights to see family again when the pandemic restrictions eased?
I can, and we did apologise, Sarah, if you know, back then, because what happened is we had the desire to try and get back to 100% capacity. We could see the demand, and then there was a whole series of issues that meant that wasn't deliverable. We had sick leave that was higher than normal. We had spare parts in the supply chain that weren't available, and aircraft going unserviceable, and we had a terrible performance at the start. We apologise for that. And we've been working really hard over the last year to get that better. Can I say, take July as an example. We got our on-time performance back to 71%, still a bit below where we were before COVID. But in Europe, the European carriers were all operating at a 50% on-time performance, because those supply chain issues are still there.
Of course, you see the world from a global perspective, but Australians care about Qantas because you've taught Australians that Qantas means something more than just a business to them, been a fundamental part of your advertising and marketing for a very long time. 30% of Australians have family overseas.
Yes.
And Qantas markets itself as an airline that delivers family reunions. So can you really justify those high prices when people were searching to do just that, to make those family reunions happen?
But as I say, Sarah, capacity is the solution to that, and it's coming back rapidly. Between the 1st of July of this year, just gone, and the 1st of July next year, there will be 6.4 million seats added internationally. I think we're adding 1 million, and our international competitors the rest.
I mean, I understand you prefer us to look forward because you're coming out of a problem, but I think there's still a lot of attention on what's just happened rather than what's to come.
Fair.
Let me ask you about this, actually. You
But
ran
can
an
I
advert.
say on that? Can I say on that? Because over that period of time in the last year, we had a standing start where we had to ramp up rapidly. And you can see that we're one of the fastest airlines to ramp up. We're back to 80% of pre-COVID levels. Being honest, from a Qantas perspective, we've got the aircraft, we've got the people to fly them. We'd rather have them in the air earning revenue, and our costs would be coming down. The airfares would be lower, and we'd be still making this amount of money. And that would be better for our customers, it would be better for our people, it would be better for the organisation. So we have a complete desire to get these aircraft back in the air and get them flying and generating revenue.
Let me just ask you, this is a question really about whether or not the extent to which Qantas is still in touch with its customers. You ran an advert during the World Cup. Young man can't go to his mother's birthday, jumps online, buys a flight to go back to be with her. That flight's a business class flight, according to the advert. That's $16,000. Is Qantas out of touch with its customers?
Well, we have customers that have huge choice with the Qantas group. They have the choice of a business class airfare, which they can buy. They have economy airfares, and today, also on our sale, we have some of the lowest...
But that's your advert. That's saying this is Qantas.
True. But you'd expect every airline, every advertising to present the best of what the company can do. But you also have advertisement of us with Jetstar connecting young families on holidays that they couldn't afford. You know, when I was a kid, we couldn't afford a holiday.
When did you first fly?
When I was 23 years of age. So I'm passionate about this. Jetstar's carried in the last decade, since its creation, 380 million people, half of them for under $100. And we have, as I said, these airfares today that are aimed at those customers that are struggling with the cost of living, that are trying to get them to visit family and friends, trying to get them to do those holidays, which people are prioritising. And I think as a group, we give that spectrum. So if you want the first class ticket, you want the business class ticket, you want the Jetstar ticket, we give you the spectrum, and not many airline groups around the world can offer you that.
Let's go to some of your critics. You've explained some of this already, but we know the CEO of Qatar Airways said late last year that you had deliberately restricted capacity to keep prices artificially elevated. Were you surprised that another CEO would attack you in that way?
Well, you know, Qatar and the CEO of Qatar is famous for saying things that are probably inappropriate. I think he said no woman could ever run an airline here in Sydney at some stage. We have an amazing woman that's going to run Qantas going forward. So I think he has a reputation for saying some outrageous things. Maybe he likes the headlines. But the reality is Qantas only has 18% international market share, one of the smallest international market shares of a home carrier. We have open access on all of the markets major markets we operate to. So, for example, there's open skies with the US, with Singapore, with Japan. United have just added 160% of their pre-COVID level of capacity. Delta double it. Japan Airlines under 20%. So these markets, the whole market's not dependent on Qantas to add capacity. And if we don't add capacity fast enough, our competitors will take our market share. So there's every incentive for us to add capacity as fast as possible. And that's what we're doing. So those accusations are just completely wrong.
Now, another source of discontent is the way Qantas handled $1.8 billion worth of flight credits during the pandemic, and in comparison to other large carriers, some of whom did a much better job. Did you make it so difficult in the hope that people would eventually just give up and yield the credits?
Well, that's again not true, because the facts on that, Sarah, are that over $1 billion has been
but you don't
refunded.
deny the excruciating experience customers had during that period, trying to get through, trying to get credits
So absolutely. And again, we apologise that for at the start.
You made a 90-second apology. I'm not saying it's nothing, but it can't cover everything that went wrong.
Well, I think at that start, what we did, I think I was on radio stations.
Yes, sorry, I was talking about the corporate video.
A corporate video. I did a lot of radio. I did a lot of media. I think I did a few media conferences explaining it. And we had, I was on the top rated radio station here, saying we got it wrong. Waiting times took over 4 hours for people to get through to the call centre. But they were never designed for the massive amount of calls that came in.
But how come other airlines managed?
Well, they didn't.
Well, they did. I mean, American Airlines had a callback system. They had an easy-to-apply credit system, for example.
Well, Air New Zealand got hammered in their home market on it.
But there were other large carriers who did much better than Qantas.
And a few other large carriers didn't completely shut down. I think the Americans had a huge amount. Their borders were kept open within the States. They were in a position where they had big funding from the US government, a lot more than we did. When you compare like with like, carriers like British Airways that had to close down, Air New Zealand that had to close down, and you look at the media in their markets, Sarah, it wasn't too different from where we are. But can I go back on the credits? Because I think it's an important thing to talk about. So what have we done? We've done now more than all of those major carriers have done, because we got it wrong at the start because the call centres took too long. What we've now done is we put a dedicated concierge line in. The call centre now, yesterday, was 3 minutes to get through. And there's a dedicated set of experts that can help you get in your credit. We've advertised the newspapers to tell you to use your credits or get refunds.
But do you understand that the damage that was done to people's relationship with Qantas during that period?
Yeah. And you know, it is the entire aviation industry that was in this category, except for those carriers that you talked about. We recognise that Qantas has an exceptional level of expectations above the rest, and that we didn't get it right, and we needed to fix it. And the important thing is we did fix it, because since March 2020, we've had $3 billion of refunds being given. We've only got 370 million of credits left. We're really encouraging people, and if your viewers have a credit, call our concierge line. We want you to either get a refund or use it, and you have till the end of this year, and you can book all into next year. And we'd rather have those credits at zero by the end of the year.
Now, this government's got a renewed focus on competition. Do you expect that their competition review is going to focus on the dominance of Qantas's market share in Australia?
So what has happened here in Australia is that Qantas has actually met different parts of the market with its business models being innovative. So we have Jetstar, which has been an unbelievable great story, and we've had Qantas as a full-service airline.
But wouldn't my Qantas flights be cheaper if there were more operators in Australia?
But you have the most open market in the world, Sarah. Because in the US, if I wanted to set up an airline today, it can only be 25% foreign owned. Here, you can have 100% foreign owned. Singapore Airlines could set up an airline here today. Qatar could if they wanted to. Bonza is American owned. Bain owned Virgin, which is American. Rex is owned by Singapore. We can't do that anywhere else in the world. And there's plenty of access here for people to fly. You know, there's, I think a few carriers are complaining about slots in Sydney, but Rex got every slot they wanted in Sydney, 108 slots for the upcoming period. Bonza, it didn't even apply for slots in Sydney. And there's a big airport opening up in 26 that's going to have unlimited slots in Sydney. So if you want to compete against Qantas, you have the most open market in the world to come in and do it. But we're at the top of our game.
Alan just says go for it. Now,
go for it, because Qantas gets better with competition. We've seen that when Virgin came in. We've seen that when Ansett was here. We know we invest and we know we improve and we stay ahead. And if the other carriers can't compete against us in that space, that's not Qantas's issue, because Qantas is delivering for its customers.
Let's go back to the question of the relationship with your customers. The ACCC says the aviation industry needs an ombudsman. Partly because of the number of complaints, but also the relative weakness of the customer's position in relation to the airline. As the dominant player, do you accept that as a judgment against Qantas?
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk about maybe a compensation scheme like the European compensation scheme and the like. The reality is that Qantas and Jetstar actually give really good compensation to people if things go wrong. For example, Jetstar, a low-cost carrier, in the middle of the Singaporean Grand Prix, had a disruption. And they found hotels in Singapore nearly $1,000 a person to put people up. So there's a lot of inbuilt protections that we give customers and provide to customers. And, you know, being honest on this thing, I think, you know, any ideas that people have to continue to enhance the amazing aviation system we have here, we're always open to listening to them.
Now, Qantas lost a court case for the illegal sacking of 1,683 workers, I think is the number, during the pandemic. The federal court found that it was illegal. Do you regret anything about that decision?
Well, that is subject to a High Court case now, Sarah, which I don't think it's appropriate to talk about until the High Court have ruled. And I think we're going to have, and I'm happy to come back on your programme and talk about when we have a final outcome.
You made an initial appeal and that was rejected, including Qantas's arguments that were rejected, that it had timed the decision in order to avoid the workers being able to
But you know the
organise.
decision from that judge was that Qantas made the decision for appropriate commercial reasons. In his mind, we couldn't rule out whether subconsciously there was a legal reason for this to happen. We're appealing this, and it is in front of the High Court, and I'd rather not talk about it because it is part of a High Court case, and it's inappropriate for us to discuss it now. And again, I'm happy to talk about once the High Court is actually ruled on.
All right, we'll come back to that. Now, look, this question, there's been a lot of publicity around the Prime Minister's son being given access to the Chairman's Lounge. I just want to ask you this question. Has it always been the case that the Prime Minister's family had access to the Chairman's Lounge?
Well, Sarah, again on the Chairman's Lounge, I can't comment on it, either confirming or denying anything, because there are privacy issues which I'm legally have to uphold. So you can forgive me for not commenting on previous members, current members. It's just very inappropriate for it to do this. Can I say, I personally believe it's just been very inappropriate for people to go off and attack the Prime Minister's son in a number of different ways. I think that's not fair. That's Anthony Albanese is the politician, but going after somebody's family like that, I think is completely inappropriate.
I understand you don't want to talk about the individual's concern. What's your criteria for giving anyone access to the Chairman's Lounge?
Again, we don't comment on...
You have in the past, you've talked about why you give access to BHP and Rio, for example.
Well, we have some criteria that is very clear, which is that some very large contracts that have business dealings with us become members of the lounge. It's very well known that every member of Parliament is a member of the lounge, so that I think has been declared in a lot of cases. But again, because of privacy issues, I can't go into the other categories and talk about who's there.
So what you're saying is the rationale is having a business relationship with the person?
The rationale could be there for a number of different reasons. And again, I'm just not going to comment on it because I'll start getting into privacy terms, which I think are inappropriate.
The overall question about today and this very large profit that Qantas is reporting in the wake of a very difficult period for Qantas and a very difficult period for your customers is whether Qantas, under Alan Joyce, runs on a philosophy of profit first, no matter the cost to customers.
Well, it clearly isn't true, because we, over my term of 15 years as the CEO of Qantas and 5 years the CEO of Jetstar, we've spent over $20 billion on new aircraft. We've spent over $2 billion on opening up new lounges and investing in new computer systems. We're spending a huge amount of money on new aircraft going forward. We always, and you look back in the entire history, have the investment with customers, with shareholders and with employees. And we always try and look after all three stakeholder groups. There was a period of time in COVID when the aviation industry on a global basis had to ground itself, and when it started up again, it ran into all sorts of problems. Some airlines struggled at the start of that, and we did. We apologise for that, but that was a period of time. When you look at Qantas, and if you've travelled internationally around the globe, you will find that the Qantas domestic network is the best full-service product offered by any airline in the world. The head of American Airlines is now on our board. He would tell you that. It's something exceptional. Qantas offers the best low-cost carrier, I think, in the world, with the product and the airfares that are operating here. And it is seen as one of the world's leading long-haul international carriers with a product of Project Sunrise that will have the best first class, the best business class, the best premium economy. If we were not focused on customers in a highly competitive market, we would not have the ability to invest, we would not have the ability to recruit, we would not have the ability to make this money. So we're very focused on the customer.
I want to come back to a question that we've already talked about, which is the fundamental source of frustration with Qantas post the pandemic, post the issue of the credits, which is the cost of airfares, particularly in relation to international airfares? Are you saying that those airfares that people have been dealing with for months and months and months, way over the cost of pre-pandemic prices, that those costs were not $1 more than they needed to be?
What I will say is that there were more demand than supply. So the last airfares that are usually sold become more expensive. That's supply and demand in hotels, in car hire, and everywhere else. But when you look at the last year that we just reported, we had 9 million airfares under $100 with Jetstar.
And what about the international fares?
And we had a lot of international airfares.
Still 30 to 40% over pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, but there were still airfares that were below what the prices were in 2005, inflation adjusted, and 2008. And we can show you those airfares. But there was very expensive airfares at the last moment when demand for business class and other classes exceeded the supply. But that is not just a Qantas Australia problem. Every airline in the world, every airline flying in and out of Australia, remember we only have 18%, had similar airfares. Every airline flying in and out of Europe had similar airfares. Every airline flying in and out of the US had similar airfares. This was because the aviation industry had a demand in excess of supply. And of course, that's the way the business models work. That's where things were. And we're in a position where we want to, I'll come back to one thing I said, Sarah, we want to get these aircraft back in the air. I want my people flying again. I want the aircraft generating revenue, and that will bring down airfares, and it will bring them down significantly over the next few years.
The market says you're worth the amount of money that you're paid and the bonuses you get, but we started earlier on, we were talking about you fronting the cost of living inquiry. How do you think the general public struggling with those costs, those pressures at the moment, look at a CEO who gets a $24 million golden handshake?
Well, I think the largest part of what I get is the shares that have been granted over basically the period of time I've been in Qantas. And those shares are granted with the expectation that they are only given if the company performs. I'm also in a position where I've come from a very working class background. I recognise the difficulties that people have with cost of living. I had that when I was growing up. So I do recognise that. But where we are in society, there are competitions for people, for CEOs. People are willing to pay that money to get the appropriate skills, but people are only willing to pay it if the results are delivered. And I think Qantas, with a record result, with the strongest balance sheet it's ever had, with returns to shareholders, returns to employees, and growth going forward, is in a great position. And that's why the shareholders have rewarded me that. We also are a very high-paying company generally. So our non-executives on average get paid $100,000 in Qantas. We have 20 to 1 in terms of people wanting a job in Qantas. We give people bonuses outside of the EBA. We're giving 11% bonuses on average.
But the federal court said you broke the law when you dismissed your ground staff. That doesn't go away.
That's subject to a High Court opinion, and I believe that we will win that case. But let's see where the High Court goes.
And we'll have you on again when that happens. Alan Joyce, thank you very much
Thank you,
indeed.
Sarah.
Thank you.